That's your job, mate. Your job.
Right, everybody, good evening, and thank you for all coming to our second EU referendum debate. The motion is this House believes that remaining in the EU is good for British business. Just to remind you, this is the second debate. We actually have 7 right the way through, so they're every Monday, either at 7:30 or 8 o'clock. Yes, and it will get really busy. Yeah, as the thing builds. We've got far more people in here than we had last week. So if you do want to attend these, then you probably need to get here about an hour before. We have a maximum of 60 people actually, on top of camera crews and everything else. If it gets really full, yes, and you are late, then we can direct you down the road to the Coach and Horses, which is the next pub. It's only about 30 or 40 yards. And they're doing a simultaneous broadcast, courtesy of my wonderful colleagues from the University of Worcester, who are actually recording the whole event. Thank you, Richard. Quite right. These are young students doing a mixture of sort of journalism and media studies, I think, mostly journalism, isn't it? Yeah, so they volunteered to simultaneously broadcast. And we're also simultaneously broadcasting, probably online now. I suspect there won't be many people there, but if there are, they should cheer. We're also at the Bishop Perone School up the road, that can take 200. And I'm delighted to say we're now online to Christopher Whitehead School as well, in St John's. Next week it'll be Hagley and Kidderminster, and it'll build and build and build. One other thing, we also have here a crew from BBC News with the Home Affairs editor for BBC News, Mark Easton, who's brought a crew along to interview the undecided of Worcester. Now, I believe that programme's going to go out next week. They've been going around the country. I think it's a series of, I think Mark's doing 3, and I think there's one in Scotland and one in Wales. It will be on every night. Yes, next week. I'm not sure what night the Cap and Gown will feature. Next week, yes, we have to debate on EU migration, and that's going to be quite a different format because we've got we've got non-politicians mostly for that, haven't we? I think, including Peter Atkinson, Dean of Worcester Cathedral. If you don't know Peter, he's an incredible man. He's a really, really, really lovely, holy, great person, and he's going to be here together with David Green, Professor David Green of the University of Worcester. I can't remember his name, but actually I do. Peter who? Who's coming? All right. Yeah. Yeah, and it's Diane James, the Deputy Leader of UKIP, is opposing. We're still short of one speaker. So that's the format. As well as politics, we also do live music every Friday and Sunday here, so get down for that if you like live music. We only do original stuff. And I hope everybody likes my mural, yes, on the back wall. It's very unique. It's the House of Commons Prime Minister's Question Time. We've actually had a busy day today. We actually had, I can't pronounce it, Gisela. Yes, I'd say Gisela, but it's Gisela. You know, Gisela Stewart, who was... Actually, she's such a lovely woman. She really is. I really liked her. But she had the vote lead bus out here, so that was and cameras and all sorts of things. That was at 4:30. So a lot going on. I'm going to now hand you over. Oh, I'm Ted Marshall, by the way. I'm the landlord. So I'm now going to hand you over to my great friend. Yes, Lord Richard Faulkner of Worcester. Richard is the Deputy Speaker in the House of Lords. He's promised to be completely impartial, which I'm not sometimes, but you are the professional, sir. So I'd like to hand over to Richard, who'll be actually running all of these debates from here on, and he'll tell you the format. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much indeed. Good evening, everybody. It's wonderful to see so many here, a lot more than last week, and that's obviously a compliment to the quality of our speakers, and I'm delighted they are all here. I'll introduce them one by one as I call them to speak, but let me just tell you a little bit about the format immediately. Each of the speakers there'll be one speaker for the motion, then one against, then another one for and another against, and then at the end of that at the end of that process, there will be a break, and then following that, there'll be questions and comments. As there are so many of you here tonight, can I urge you please to put your questions and your comments on the cards that are on the tables. If you haven't got a card on the table, I'm sure Ted or somebody behind the bar will give you one. But we've got to try to regulate the questions and discussions afterwards, otherwise the thing will descend into complete chaos. We will keep going for as long as you're interested and there are questions still coming, but we will obviously have a cut-off at the end of the evening. During the break, we shall hear from Richard Soper, who is going to tell us a word about the Worcester Community Trust, which is an astonishingly good cause, and I'm going to ask him to speak after William Oliver, our fourth speaker, is finished. So, as you listen to the speeches, get your questions and comments ready, and as I say, jot them down on the cards with your names, please. Right, we're going to start now. Our first speaker is Anthea McIntyre, who is a member of the European Parliament. She has been in the Parliament since 2011 and represents the Conservative Party in the West Midlands. She is the Conservative employment spokesman, so it's entirely appropriate. She's here talking about the benefits of the EU for business, and she's also a member of the Agriculture Committee. She has a family agricultural business in this part of the world, near Ross-on-Wye, a highly respected member of the European Parliament, and I'm delighted to give the floor to her.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and it's great to be here this evening. I'm delighted to be proposing the motion. I think, for me, British business has considerable benefits from being in the EU, and in particular, I think it revolves especially around the single market. So I'm going to say a little bit about the single market, and I'm perhaps concentrating on that, partly because I believe my opponents, the Vote Leave campaign, don't believe we should be in the single market. And so we need to identify what it is that the single market provides for business and why I believe it's actually important. It gives us access, of course, to trade across 28 countries and 500 million customers. In the West Midlands region, we export £11.5 billion worth of goods to other EU countries, and that's 40% of our exports. And you know, if we reduced our exports to other European countries by 10%, we would have to double the exports to countries like China and India to make up for that loss. So it's quite a big gap that we're talking about. Some 4.5 million British jobs are linked to our trade in Europe, about 386,000 across the West Midlands, and about 193,000 of those in manufacturing. Now, I'm not claiming that all of those jobs would go if we left the European Union. I'm not claiming that the lights will go out, that the world will freeze over, these other things that we've been accused of. Of course, Britain is a great country. It will continue to have great businesses. It will continue to have great scientists, continue to have great academics. So the arguments for me are whether we're better off staying in or better off coming out. And on balance, having looked at it all, I think we're definitely better where we are in the EU. Now, it was mentioned that I'm the employment spokesman in Europe for the Conservatives. And I continually preach the message there that it's not EU diktats that create jobs, it's businesses that create jobs. And what we need to do is free up businesses to grow and create those jobs, because 85% of new jobs come from SMEs. So that's why I think it's important. And if you look at the moment, we are in the EU, we have a really good growth rate, we have the lowest unemployed claimant count for 40 years. We have more people in work than ever before. And we have about 700,000 job vacancies in the UK. So we need to have access to the skills that we need to fill those jobs. I think the other thing I particularly want to talk about is services. It's all very well, we do very well in manufacturing, but about 80% of the UK economy is actually in services, and they form the majority of our exports. So, do you know, the UK has a trade surplus in services with the EU in every year since 2005. And in 2014, that surplus was £15.4 billion. So outside the EU, the UK will have to rely on World Trade, WTO, World Trade Organization rules on trades and services. And of course, we'd still be able to trade with other EU countries, but they will impose both tariff and non-tariff barriers. I thought it was quite interesting to, people say, oh no, they want to trade with us, it'll all happen. But do you know, at the moment, if you are outside the EU and you're trying to export goods into the EU, you come under something called the combined nomenclature. Now this is a sort of harmonised system that's run by the World Customs Organization, and it's a list of commodities that forms the basis for international trade negotiations. It's applied by most trading nations, and it's an enormous complexity. Do you know, the rules themselves run to 932 pages with an accompaniment of 392 pages of explanatory notes. Now these are complexities that at the moment we just don't have to worry about. So let me just, for example, take a teacup. If I was trying to sell a teacup into the EU from outside, this falls under chapter 69, beginning on page 439, and there are two sections, each with its own tariffs, which range from 0 to 12%. So, okay, we look and we find tableware, but that has a range of tariffs. It depends what type of tableware, depends what type of ceramic, and it actually depends what it's made of. So if it's porcelain or china, it would be 12%. If it's stoneware, it's 5.5%. If it's earthenware or fine pottery, it's 9%. And otherwise, it's 7%. So we shouldn't go away thinking that these rules are something that we would easily bypass and that we would have no problem with negotiating. I believe that our trade is vital to our success as an economy, and that's the reason that I believe businesses benefit. In the days before joining the single market, or even the common market, if you were trying to get a lorry load of goods from Birmingham to Barcelona, you would have needed 86 separate documents with you. Now, how many? It's just one. So the simplification of doing trade has really improved enormously. And so, for all these reasons, I think that trade is of huge benefit. Trade is what England and Britain has always done, and the EU makes it easier. So, from my point of view, and I hope you will agree, that being a member of the EU is very good for British business.
Thanks very much indeed. Thanks very much indeed. That's an excellent start to our evening. Our next speaker is Peter Jewell, who those of you who came last week had the pleasure of hearing then. Peter is a great Worcester and Worcestershire figure. He's a member of the board of Worcestershire County Cricket Club. He formerly played for the county when he was a little bit younger. He's also a former professional goalkeeper for Peterborough United, But above all, for the purpose of this evening, he's a successful businessman with a very, very valuable property portfolio, and he's the treasurer of UKIP. So, you.
Thank you very much. Firstly, I have to just correct you on one thing. I got accepted to play for Worcester Cricket and for Peterborough United, which was a bit of a joke as a goalkeeper. Mainly because I used my rugby tactics to use as a goalkeeper. But I disappeared to another country after getting made a very good offer to go there. So I actually never played it. And because it was such a long time ago, the time the post had gone by sea, I didn't even know it until later. Anyway. Last week I just did something completely off the cuff, and this week I'm going to go through an article that I'm doing for an overseas newspaper that you may or may not be interested in. And it really starts off by saying, ask the Greeks who really run the European Union. The arsenal of fear must also be nearly exhausted. Those daring to vote to leave the EU will inflict on Britain collapsing house prices, according to George Osborne and Christine Lagarde of the IMF. Who should worry about the EU's unemployment-soaked economies? A technical recession, Mark Carney, a technical Irish Canadian with a long record of error, who for this disgraceful political interference should be kicked back to Ottawa. I believe, and I sit on a board with him, in Mervyn King and his views on this matter. It's clearly a Corporal Jones moment for the Remainers. Though any cries of don't panic come far too late, they are manifestly drowning in it. Anyway, two can play that game. What must we fear if we stay? Not merely relentless, uncontrolled immigration and the lies told about it. Putting such burdens on our schools, hospitals, infrastructure, and that UK citizens suffer. But inevitably, our nation's destiny being increasingly subject to the wishes of foreigners who we don't elect. I'm not talking about the amorphous idea of Brussels, I'm talking about Germany. 5 years ago, I wrote a piece referring to the control Angela Merkel exerted over Europe. However, one looks at the German power today, one realises that when I wrote this, she had hardly even started. The key to German success is its participants in a weak economy and currency, whose value would collapse without it, enabling its exports to sell far more cheaply than had it retained the Deutschmark. Therefore, as Boris Johnson notes in an interview in the Sunday Times yesterday, it continues to grow in economic strength relative to the partners, including us, but especially those in the Eurozone, notably France and Italy, who would benefit greatly from restoring the franc and the lira. Any net exporter to the EU, which we are most certainly not, given the 24 million trade gap with our partners in the first 3 months of 2016, which would then rack up to somewhere around about 90 billion, will benefit hugely vastly in the incomprehensible welter of EU regulations on products, employment law, which keep external competitors at arm's length and pile costs on them. If they wish to have access to the single market, Germany is so rich and getting richer at the expense of not least its partners that it can afford to pretend globalization isn't happening. We are not so fortunate, and leaving the EU to avoid all those regulations and take proper advantage of the wider world is not at least the reason why we must vote to get out. Germany forces far weaker partners in the EU to stay in its currency zone, and that's crippling them. If we stay, we are going to suffer immense collateral damage from two crises that the Germans will precipitate. Firstly, there'll be one in the Eurozone. Dr. Sabas Sabori, chief economist at the leading investment business Tosca Fund, predicts a detonation of devaluations around the periphery of the Eurozone in his latest briefing to clients. So incapable are the non-Eurozone countries such as Hungary, Romania, Poland of competing with the German dictated economic model that a devaluation and the instability that it will bring are only options. So anyone who thinks of staying in the EU is like buying a ticket to a place of permanent prosperity once his head examined. Worse in Britain, Dr. Savorier predicts Germany's economy will not come off lightly, nor at least because its clients and customers will find goods suddenly more expensive. And when Germany starts to struggle, God help the rest of the EU. Because when Germany's checkbook closes, the economies it is shoring up, such as Greece, and by the way, July is another paycheck time, will be on their own. And Greece's economy is 1/11 the size of France, which is a basket case and cannot go on as it is. If we stay in the EU, there will be a huge cost for us from the chaos despite being out of the Eurozone, having renewed our vows to remain in the EU. Through sickness and in health, we will be required to contribute to funding the fiscal efforts being applied to ever more sickly EU partners. The costs will be huge, and once we have committed ourselves to remain, we will be forced to join the communal effort to save ailing partners in the EU's version of the Rooseveltian New Deal. Such a wave of economic hardship will propel more impoverished Europeans across open borders into the UK. And don't forget that Ian Duncan Smith disclosed last week that Mr. Cameron deleted a passage about controlling immigration from a speech he made because he would not want to upset the Germans. That is the reality of the relationship with the EU. If we choose to stay in, the Germans will ensure that we become ever more obedient to their policies. So stand by for the next project, Turkey's admission to the EU, and all that it would entail. It is not just deeply offensive, but ironic that Mr. Cameron should last week have invoked the idea of another world war in his latest intelligence insulting act of hysteria aimed at making us vote to stay in the EU. It is not just that our fathers and grandfathers fought in the world wars to allow Britain the right to continue to rule itself, rather than be ruled by Germans. Mr. Cameron plainly won't admit that the German domination of the EU means that being conquered without war and signing up to the EU is signing up to the Fourth Reich. Ask the Greeks if you think I exaggerate. Germany runs Europe without firing a shot. It forces far weaker partners to stay in the currency zone that it is crippling. And uses the economic muscle to dictate immigration and other key policies. And if you believe the Germans won't take a UK vote to stay in as a signal to continue and intensify their control over the EU and to make us help pay for the baleful effects, then you aren't paying attention. It is not war we should fear, but the Germans do in peace. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. The third speaker on the motion, being a member of the EU, is, saying the third speaker in this debate on being a member of the EU is good for business is Richard Bourne, who is a local businessman. He's managing director of Bondtech Limited, a small family business which specialises in high-tech adhesives. He's worked throughout the world on a consultancy basis, and he's been a board member and advisor to the board in the USA. He's recently retired as a Worcester City Councillor and been a cabinet member for finance. and he is the leader of the Labour In campaign in Worcester. Richard Bourne.
Thank you. I think first of all I must apologise. I thought I'd come to a meeting where I was going to talk to you about business, but after what I just heard, God knows. Yes, I'm associated with the Labour Party, but the reason I'm here tonight is to talk about business. I'm not going to talk politically, I'm going to talk how my business benefits from being in the EU. We are a small family business, we don't have lots of employees, we don't have lots of resources, yet we can compete on an international basis. We trade in Europe, we trade outside Europe, so I'm very familiar with what that means to a business, certainly of our size. I can't speak for large businesses because I don't run a large business. The first thing I wanted to talk about is where we hear from the people who wish to leave, there's all these marvellous markets out there. Do you not think business has already thought of this? I've been to China, I've been to Australia, I've been to Asia, I've been to many countries to actually do business. Let's take China, this marvellous country where we could all become rich. Well, the first fact that we actually export more to Southern Ireland than we do to China, well, in my experience, my company will not sell to China for one very simple reason. We cannot protect our intellectual property. We have seen countries like Huntsman, who are a very large player in my market. They have failed to protect their patents. So my little company has got no chance. We have took a decision that we will not trade there. Should we leave? Believe me, we still won't be trading there. If we have to trade outside the EU, we're already familiar with some of the processes we follow. Now, the first thing we have to do when we trade outside the EU is fill in what's called a commercial invoice. I said fill in, we have to fill 6 in. We have to put, as already been mentioned, commodity codes. Now, commodity codes, I looked up on the government website, there's actually 98 chapters on how you work out which is the correct commodity code. As a small company, it takes me a long time to read 98 chapters. If I get it wrong when we send the goods to the country, it causes problem for my customer in relation to duty they would have to pay, in relation to whether the goods will be let in, because a proportion of our product is chemicals, so we have to be very clear on what the products are. And it takes time, and time is money to my company. If I trade within the EU, the one document I produce is what we like to call on this side an invoice. That's all we do. We produce an invoice, we sell the goods to the customer pays us. If I have any intellectual property issues with someone in Europe, I can protect that patent very easily. We also benefit as a small business, as does a large business. If we buy materials, as we do from within the EU, we don't pay the VAT because we're VAT registered. So when we bring the goods in, we are not charged VAT. If I bring the goods from outside the EU, I pay VAT. So you ask any small business managing director, as I am, what is your biggest problem? And it's usually cash flow. So if you say to me, all of a sudden, all your raw materials, you've got to pay 20% more cash out. That would be a problem, and it would be a problem to many companies as well as our own. In the EU, we buy the goods, we don't pay the VAT as it comes in. It gets deferred. The other thing I hear is about red tape, regulations. Everybody says, if we could get rid of this red tape. Well, to me, what they're really looking for is not getting rid of the red tape, it's getting rid of workers' rights to actually come down and take away all the hard-won rights that have predominantly come through EU legislation. But more and more, the issue is our products. People say, oh, I have to put this label on. I bought one of our products with me. You probably can't see. Basically, the whole back of that product is the legislation, what we have to put on the product. But the thing is, we only have to do it once to sell into Europe. If we sell to other countries like America, Australia, we have to carry out different labelling, which takes time. You know, we're a small company. We don't have the resources to do this. Whether you agree with the various arguments, please listen to what I've said, because I honestly have said it on the basis as a businessman, not as a politician. We need to remember 200 British companies trade with Europe, 200,000. More than 3 million jobs in Britain are now linked to Europe. So hundreds of thousands of jobs will be created as the market expands as we move forward. It really is important, certainly for my company, and I'm sure many others, that we remain. Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed, Richard. The fourth speaker is William Oliver, who is also a UKIP member. He tells me that he campaigned against membership of the European Union in the referendum in 1975. He's a chartered engineer with his own business in the construction industry, which is all based in the United Kingdom. William Oliver.
Good evening, everybody. I'm glad to say I'm going to talk about business, because as far as the European Union is concerned, really, it's very simple. If you leave side, as obviously I am, it's quite a simple discussion, and I will talk you through it bit by bit. Unlike my good friend Richard here, I'm managing director of a small company. At my height, I've employed 115 people. That was under old Labour. Since things have got a bit tougher, down to about 60. I work all over the United Kingdom. I employ directly about 60 people. And life is not made easy by regulation. I listened very much to what the MEP had to say here, and it was very interesting, but it didn't tell me an awful lot. Now, I agree that we should actually be mindful of what this single market is supposed to be. And I can assure you that we from the Get Out campaign do not wish to join the single market. The single market, as such, I'm very proudly told that there's the biggest in the world. At the moment, it might be. But I would point out there are 1 billion people in China, and it's only a question of time. It's actually a customs union, as you well know. And the customs unions are set up to protect their internal market. It is the pressure from the World Trade Organization that over the years have pushed the tariff down that the then European Economic Community set, which, by the way, in 1975 is what you were voting for. The European Economic Community. They called it the common market. They lied to you, because it's all about the federal state of Europe, actually. And I'm not going to talk about that. These are the things, throughout the theory for Richard, I just like you to point some actual facts out to you, which you don't seem to have, to help you a little bit. You can research them, and if you think I'm wrong, please let me know. The EU 28 is in steep decline. For example, in 1975, when we joined the EEC, that unit of about 7 countries actually had 37% of the GDP of the world. Pretty strong. We were the sick man of Europe. Understandable that our politicians push us that way, although I didn't agree. When the UK, that was when we joined. At this present time, the European Union has less than 20% of global market. That means you've got Germany in there as well as ourselves, so it's an absolute basket case. The reason for it, of course, is that it's based on a socialist model. It's full of regulation, and Germany seems to survive a bit better than some other countries. I'll give you another little example for consideration. Our own economy, take our whole economy, 75% of all business is entirely internal, leaving 25% for export, rather obviously. So we're good at arithmetic in here, aren't we? Now, that export work, 40% is with the EU. So that's now 10%. So we apply EU regulation to 90% of all the trade that we actually do, which seems a bit loopy to me. Now, I've gone on about regulation. Oh, just one little point. We turn our backs on our Commonwealth. You might be interested to know that the GDP of the British Commonwealth exceeds considerably that of the EU. We could have been with the Commonwealth. Now, the results of some of the regulations that have screwed our businesses up are as follows. Common fisheries policy, absolutely decimated our inshore fishing. Heath knew about it, wasn't bothered. Common agricultural policy, most of the subsidies go for larger farmers. 6 billion. And we get approximately half that back. The REACH directive, which decimated the chemical industry, cost us loads of small plants, small manufacturing businesses. Every single chemical they produce had to be at high cost, analysed and approved by Brussels. The WEEE directive screwed up the electrical industry. So I need to go on, but I will. The large combustion directive. When we joined the EEC, I believe we were the 9th largest producer of aluminium. It's put under the British Aluminium Company, got sold to RTZ and people like that. We now, as a result of the large combustion directive, we now have one aluminium plant left. It's powered by hydroelectricity in Fort William. I've got a customer in the Midlands, has to bring that material, a big truck, down from Fort William every day. Think of the cost of that, before we go into the greens and CO2. There's a whole business about climate policy, which is presently costing this country about 50 billion. It goes on and on and on. Now, excuse me, it's turning the page over. That'll make me nervous, you know. So, I won't be very long now, but what were the benefits? What do we perceive the benefits are if we leave? First thing we can do is rejoin the WTO. As you probably realise, we can't make our own trade deal. It's impossible. It has to be made by our friends in Brussels, unelected commissars. So we can make our own trade deals. When you consider the imbalance, 5-6 million jobs that depend on their trade with us from the EU. It's a 2 billion job deficit. That's what they don't tell you. I started thinking, we don't have a single market, but there's nothing wrong with a free trade deal. Mexico has a free trade deal, so we will, through the WTO, have free trade deals, and we'll have a free trade deal with the EU. Take about a week or something. Well, I might exaggerate a little bit to make the point. But the big thing also is we will deregulate our industry. We have the opportunity to deregulate our industry because we're our own sovereign nation. It's our destiny. And as Mr. Churchill said, if you have to make the choice between being in Europe and the open sea, you must choose the open sea. And he's one of my icons. Ladies and gentlemen, I urge you to put the great back into Britain, to leave these little Europeans themselves, and to get the hell out of it.
Thanks very much, William. Can I just have your attention for a moment, please? We're going to have a little break in a second. During that time, I'd like you to think about the questions and comments you want to make. And as I said before, please use the cards and get them up to me so that we can manage the next part of the proceedings in an orderly way. At the end of the evening, there will be a vote which the BBC is going to film, and you're going to be asked to say whether you're for the proposal, against the proposal, or whether you still haven't made up your mind. That is the third option you'll be given later on. Before I ask Ted to say something to us, I'm going to ask Richard Soper to say a word about the wonderful work that the Worcester Community Trust does.
Thanks very much. Well, firstly, if we could look to my right and thank Ted Marshall for him supporting the Worcester Community Trust. And we'll be here for about 3 months. Okay, so we sleep here as well, which is very handy being in a pub. In front of you, or around the table, you'll see what the Community Trust does. We've got 6 locations around here supporting the community in various activities. But I just want to focus on 2 things, if you would think of this in supporting us in 2 ways. One, always financial, because obviously we're a charity. That means we need funding to support the community. and particularly I'm going to focus on the elderly, where we run Snack and Chat. And this equates roughly that we have to raise around £80,000 a year to support the elderly in our Snack and Chat through the 6 locations and supporting through other locations as well. That's number one. The second one is, as you may know, most of us are, or a lot of us are volunteers, of which I'm one as well. And you'll see inside here we're looking to support volunteers to work inside our community trusts, whether it be in Snack and Chat, the youth, or pre and post school, and other activities we do. So if you've got some time on your hands and you want to support us, there's both me here, Richard Soper, and if I ask Ellen Skerritt at the back to wave her hand as well, please ask us any questions. And once again, thanks Ted for giving us this great opportunity. Thanks very much indeed.
Off, so thank you.
Yeah, you can send me off later, Martin. Thank you, Richard. I just want to endorse what Richard says. The Worcester Community Trust really runs on an knife edge sometimes, I think it's fair to say. But they do fantastic work, unsung work in the city, you know, helping both the young and the old. And, you know, I'm going to pay the poor landlord now here. We don't make a lot of money being a landlord, but and we put on lots of live music, and of course we're putting on this event tonight and future events, and there's no funding at all for it, so we're not asking for much, but I would ask, I think you're going to go around with the buckets, aren't you, Richard, shortly? I would ask that you give very generously, if you wouldn't mind, to the Worcester Community Trust, and that's our chosen charity, so I think they do great work. So a round of applause for them, I think. Apparently I've got to say a few more of the words before I get thrown off. So yeah, if you can actually fill in your questions or speeches, give them to me or to Richard, yeah, all my staff members. We'll start to go through. There's a lot more questions this week than there was last week. It's funny that, isn't it?
More people.
Well, there is a few more people, not many. So please, you know, not help yourself to drink, but go and buy a drink, and we'll be back in about 25 minutes, something like that. Thank you very much.
Yeah,